Today we will be solving percent problems with an equation. Prior to this, we've solved percent problems using proportions, but today we're going to use the percent formula. It's a percent of a whole is a part of that whole. Okay, so it's going to be short form, percent of a whole number is equal to part of that number. Let's take a look at example 1. Example 1 says 32 ounces is 25% of a gallon. How many ounces is a gallon? 32 ounces is part of what we need, and that happens to be 25%. So this is the percent. How many ounces is the gallon? So this part right here would be the whole, which is what we're trying to find. Now, there's two ways you can solve these problems. You can either solve them as a decimal, or you can solve them as a fraction. I'm going to show you both ways. Whichever one is easiest for you is the one you should use. The first way is with a decimal. Now, remember our percent formula from before. Percent of the whole is equal to the part. Okay, well, we know the percent and the part. We know that 25%, if we move our decimal 2 places, as a decimal would be 0.25 times the whole is equal to the part. Now, our part is 32 ounces. Okay, now we have to solve for W. When we solve for W, since this is multiplication here, so you need to divide by 0.25 to find what W is. So if we divide both sides by 0.25, showing my work here, my 25's cancel, I'm left with W is equal to 32 divided by 0.25. When you compute that out, you actually get 128 ounces. Okay, what does that tell you? That tells you that there is 128 ounces in a gallon. We get that up here. Now, you can solve this same problem again using the same formula, but instead of using a decimal, let's use a fraction. Same formula, percent of a whole is equal to part of what we're looking for. Now, our percent is 25. Remember, percent is out of 100. So therefore, we have 25 over 100. Some of you may know that as 1/4. Okay, so now I can rewrite it. 1/4 of the whole, our whole we don't know, is our percent. Excuse me, not our percent, it is our part. Our part is 32 ounces. Okay, same thing. Instead of multiplying by our whole here, we're going to have to multiply by the reciprocal, or divide by 1/4. Instead of dividing by 1/4, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal since it is a fraction. So we're going to multiply by 4/1 since that's the reciprocal. This all becomes a big 1, and I'm left with W. Now, since I multiplied by 4/1 over here, I have to do it on the other side of the equal sign to the 32. So basically, all I'm doing is taking 32 times 4/1. Now, 32 times 4 ends up being 128 ounces, which again tells you that 128 ounces is the same amount as 1 gallon. Example 2, Mr. V bought a used car for $8,500. The sales tax rate was 7%. How much did Mr. V pay in tax? Now, I'm going to divide my paper in two here to show you that you can solve this both with a fraction or with a decimal, and you'll still get the same answer. He bought a used car for $8,500. Okay, that's important information. The sales tax rate was 7%. That's also a piece of valuable information. How much did he pay in tax? Well, tax is part of what we pay. Let's take a look at our percent formula. We have percent of a whole is part of what we have. Now, percent we know is 7%. You can move your decimal place or divide by 100, and you're going to get 0.07 as your percent when you are going to use that to convert. Then you multiply it by the whole. 8,500 is the total cost of the car, so therefore that's the whole here. Then you're going to solve for P. Well, this works out for you this time. You just have to take 8,500 times 7 to get, or 8,500 times 0.07 to get how much he'll pay in tax. When you do compute that, you get $595 in tax is what would be added on to that 8,500 when he buys it. Now let's solve this again using a fraction. Okay, same thing, percent of a whole is equal to part. Our percent is 7 out of 100 times our whole, which is 8,500, is equal to our part. Okay, well, you can knock off these zeros here because it's like canceling and multiplication, so basically you now have 7 times 85. When you multiply that out, you get $595 is what he paid in tax. Okay, you get the same answer both times, but it just, whichever one is easiest for you to use, please do so. I find the decimal is easiest, but sometimes the fraction can be easier. The fraction way can be easier. In example 3, we have to decide which is easier, if we're going to convert our percent to a decimal or to a fraction. Let's look at A. A says the sales tax rate is 8.25%. What is the sales tax on an $18.97 purchase? Remember our percent formula. Percent of the whole is a part. Now, percent, if we had to convert 8.25 all into a fraction, it gets a little complicated. So therefore, just divide by 100, and to make our percent into a decimal, it'd be 0.0825 times the whole, which would be $18.97, is equal to the part that we're looking for. So in this case, it just is a lot easier if we use a decimal. Now, let's look at part B. It says shirts are on sale for 33 1/3% off the regular price. How much is saved on a $24 shirt? Most of you might know already that if you move the decimal in here is really right here. Okay? We just don't write it because we have a fraction. If we were to write 1/3 as a decimal number, it would happen to be 0.3. So converting this into a fraction is actually a lot easier because 33 1/3% as a fraction is 1/3. So remember our percent formula, 1/3 would be our percent of the whole, which would be 24, is the part. Well, this becomes a really simple problem here. I wrote 25, but I meant 24. This becomes a really simple problem then, because 3 and 24 will cancel. You'll get 8, and so therefore, how much is saved on this $24 shirt? It would be $8. Okay, see how the fraction makes it a lot easier to compute it. It's mental math now. We have one more example to look at. In our last example here, it says Blanca correctly answered 23 of the 25 questions. What percent of the questions did she answer correctly? Okay, percent formula. We have percent of the whole is equal to part. Now, this would be part of our whole. This would be the whole number of questions. This time we're looking for the percent. So percent of our whole number is equal to the part, which is 23. Now we have to solve for the percent. So how to undo this multiplication here is we have to actually divide by 25 because we want to be left with our percent, so we have to divide by everything else that's there. If we divide by everything else that's there, everything not in the box would be 25. Okay, we have to do that on both sides of the equal sign to keep our balance balanced. Now we have percent is equal to 23 over 25. Okay, I would accept it in fraction form, but you could also compute this out to get a decimal number. Okay, that concludes lesson 58. Your homework then is the practice problems on page 396. You have practice problems A through G. Also, if you have any questions, please write them down in your notebook and be ready to ask me them before you come to class. Access time would be a good time to ask such questions. All right, see you tomorrow.